You bring home a beautiful new fish. It looks healthy, swims actively, and you can already see it thriving in your carefully maintained aquarium. Within 2 weeks, half your tank is dead. What happened? The fish you bought carried invisible passengers, parasites, bacteria, or diseases that were waiting for the right moment to strike. This scenario plays out in home aquariums every single day, and most of the time, it's completely preventable. Every fish in your local store has survived a grueling journey. From breeding farms where thousands of fish swim in crowded conditions, they're netted, bagged, and shipped to importers. From importers to wholesalers. From wholesalers to your local fish store. Each transfer means new water, new stress, new exposure. By the time that fish reaches the display tank at your local shop, it's already been through more environmental changes in a few weeks than it would experience in years in the wild. But here's what makes this journey particularly dangerous. Stress doesn't just make fish uncomfortable, stress fundamentally compromises their ability to survive. When fish experience chronic stress from transportation, handling, and environmental changes, their bodies release stress hormones that suppress immune function. Research has shown that stressed fish have weakened mucus layers, reduced antibody production, and compromised physical barriers against disease. The protective slime coat that normally shields fish from pathogens begins to break down. Their scales and skin, which serve as secondary barriers, become vulnerable to invasion. Think of a fish's immune system like a fortress. In healthy conditions, this fortress has thick walls, active guards, and multiple layers of defense. But stress tears down those walls brick by brick. The beneficial bacteria, parasites, fungi, and viruses that exist in every aquatic environment suddenly find openings they couldn't penetrate before. Even fish that appear perfectly healthy can be carrying pathogens at levels their immune systems can barely control. Add them to your established tank, and suddenly those same pathogens have access to fish whose immune systems aren't prepared for this particular invader. The most insidious aspect, many diseases have incubation periods. A fish might look completely healthy for days or weeks, while parasites multiply inside its body or on its gills where you can't see them. By the time visible symptoms appear, it's often too late. The disease has already spread to every inhabitant in your display tank. Consider Ichthyophthirius multifilius, commonly called ick or white spot disease. This protozoan parasite has a complex life cycle that makes it particularly dangerous. The white spots you see on infected fish are actually mature parasites feeding beneath the skin. When mature, these parasites drop off, sink to the substrate, and each one divides into potentially hundreds of free-swimming offspring. These offspring then search for new hosts to infect. In a quarantine tank, you can break this cycle and ensure the fish is truly parasite-free before introducing it to your main tank. In a display tank full of fish, it can sweep through the population in days. Then there's velvet disease, caused by dinoflagellates like Picenoidinium in fresh water or Amyloidinium in salt water. These parasites are even smaller than ick, so small that infected fish appear to be dusted with extremely fine golden or rust-colored powder rather than distinct white spots. Velvet is particularly lethal because it attacks the gills aggressively, causing rapid respiratory failure. Fish with velvet often show heavy breathing and may swim directly into water flow, trying to get more oxygen. Unlike ick, which gives you some time to respond, velvet can kill most or all fish in a tank within 12 to 24 hours once symptoms appear. Bacterial infections add another layer of complexity. Columnaris bacteria exist in virtually every aquarium, usually at levels that healthy fish can easily resist. But introduce a stressed fish carrying a high bacterial load, and suddenly you're dealing with an outbreak. The bacteria attack rapidly, causing cotton-like growths, fin rot, and systemic infections that can decimate an entire tank before you've even identified the problem. One experienced aquarist shared how they went 20 years without quarantining fish, believing they didn't need it. Then they introduced new fish carrying Columnaris. Multiple tanks were affected, and they lost dozens of valuable fish over several months despite aggressive treatment. That expensive lesson taught them what many hobbyists learn the hard way. Most of the time you'll get lucky without quarantining, but when things go wrong, they go catastrophically wrong. Internal parasites present yet another hidden threat. Camelinus worms live in fish intestines, and their life cycle means you might not see any external signs until the adult worms protrude from the fish's vent. By which time every fish in your tank has likely been exposed through contaminated waste. One hobbyist bought a healthy-looking paradise fish and added it directly to their community tanks. A month later, they noticed a red worm emerging from the fish's anus. The resulting Columnaris outbreak cost them $200 in medication and dozens of fish, including beloved angelfish they'd raised for years. Now they quarantine every fish for 6 weeks without exception. So, what exactly happens during proper quarantine, and why does it work? The concept is straightforward. Isolate new arrivals in a separate system where you can observe them for disease, allow them to recover from transport stress, and if necessary, treat any problems that arise without exposing your main tank. But the execution requires understanding some fundamental biology. Water quality in a quarantine system depends entirely on beneficial bacteria, microscopic organisms that convert toxic ammonia from fish waste into less harmful compounds through a process called the nitrogen cycle. Fish constantly excrete ammonia through their gills and in their waste. In nature, this ammonia is diluted by enormous volumes of water and processed by vast bacterial populations. In an aquarium, you need to cultivate enough of these bacteria to handle the waste load. The nitrogen cycle operates in stages. First, bacteria called Nitrosomonas convert ammonia into nitrite, still toxic but less immediately lethal than ammonia. Then bacteria called Nitrobacter convert nitrite into nitrate, which is relatively safe at moderate levels and can be removed through water changes. These beneficial bacteria don't float freely in the water. They colonize surfaces with good water flow. Your filter media, the walls of the tank, decorations, even the substrate all provide homes for bacterial colonies. Here's the critical part. Establishing these bacterial populations takes time. In a brand new quarantine tank with no cycled filter media, ammonia and nitrite will spike as bacteria slowly multiply to match the waste production. This cycling process typically takes 4 to 6 weeks. For fish already stressed from transport, being placed in an uncycled tank with toxic ammonia and nitrite levels is potentially more dangerous than skipping quarantine entirely. This is why experienced aquarists maintain cycled filter media specifically for quarantine use. The most effective method is running a spare sponge filter or extra filter cartridge in your main display tank continuously. This media becomes colonized with mature bacterial populations. When you need to quarantine new fish, you simply move this cycled media to the quarantine tank, bringing millions of established bacteria with it. The tank is instantly capable of processing waste. After quarantine ends, the media returns to your display tank. Some hobbyists keep their quarantine systems running full-time, either with a few hardy fish or by adding small amounts of fish food weekly to feed the bacteria. Let's talk about the physical setup of an effective quarantine system. Most experts recommend tanks between 10 and 30 gallons, depending on the size and number of fish you're quarantining. Smaller tanks are cheaper and use less medication if treatment becomes necessary, but they also have less stable water chemistry and smaller margins for error. Larger tanks provide more swimming space and better dilution of waste products, reducing stress on recovering fish. The quarantine tank should be bare bottom with no substrate. This serves multiple purposes. It makes it easy to see and remove fish waste for inspection, eliminates hiding places for parasites like Aish to complete their life cycle, and allows for thorough cleaning between uses. However, fish need places to hide to feel secure, especially when stressed. Most aquarists use PVC pipe fittings, elbows, T-joints, and straight sections as caves and hiding spots. These are inexpensive, easy to clean, and provide the cover fish need without absorbing medications or harboring parasites. Filtration is essential, but chemical filtration should be avoided in quarantine. A simple sponge filter provides both biological filtration through bacterial colonization and mechanical filtration by trapping particles. Air-driven sponge filters also create surface agitation, which is crucial for gas exchange. Hang-on-back power filters work well too, especially if you can move seated media between your display and quarantine tanks. Just remember to remove any activated carbon or other chemical media before adding medications, as they'll absorb the medications and render treatment ineffective. Temperature control is non-negotiable. Fish are ectothermic. Their body temperature and metabolism are controlled by their environment. A reliable heater keeps the quarantine tank at the same temperature as your display tank, or slightly warmer in some cases. Warmer temperatures within the species' tolerance range can boost immune function and accelerate the life cycle of parasites, making them vulnerable to treatment more quickly. Many parasites are only susceptible to medication during specific life stages, so speeding up their reproduction can actually help eliminate them faster. Lighting in a quarantine tank should be minimal. Stressed or sick fish often feel exposed under bright lights and will hide constantly, making observation difficult and increasing stress levels. Many aquarists keep quarantine tanks in quiet rooms with just ambient light or use very low-intensity lighting for brief observation periods. Some go further, draping blankets over the tank to create a dark, calm environment for the first day or two after new fish arrive. Location matters more than you might think. Your quarantine tank should be physically separated from your display tanks, ideally in a different room, but at minimum 10 feet away. Why? Some diseases can actually spread through aerosol transmission. When water splashes or air bubbles burst at the surface, tiny droplets can become airborne and contaminate nearby tanks. This is particularly concerning with highly infectious diseases like marine velvet or certain bacterial infections. Maintaining separate equipment, nets, siphons, buckets, for your quarantine system prevents cross-contamination. Many aquarists use color-coded equipment or clear labels to avoid accidentally using quarantine tools on their display tanks. Now comes a critical decision point that divides the aquarium community. How do you safely move fish from the transport bag into the quarantine tank? The traditional approach is called drip acclimation. You float the sealed bag in the quarantine tank for 15 to 30 minutes to equalize temperature, then slowly add tank water to the bag over the course of 1 to several hours, gradually adjusting the fish to the new water chemistry before finally netting them into the tank. But there's a problem with this method that many aquarists overlook. When fish are sealed in a bag during transport, they continue producing ammonia through their gills and waste. In a closed container, carbon dioxide builds up in the water, which lowers pH. At low pH, ammonia exists primarily in its less toxic form. But the moment you open that bag and carbon dioxide escapes, the pH rises rapidly. As pH increases, the ammonia in that water converts to its highly toxic form. If you're drip acclimating for hours with that bag open, you're potentially exposing your fish to lethal ammonia levels while trying to help them adjust to slightly different water chemistry. This realization has led many experienced aquarists, particularly in the marine hobby, to abandon drip acclimation for shipped fish. Instead, they match the temperature and salinity of their quarantine tank to the shipping water as closely as possible, float the bag just long enough to equalize temperature, then immediately net the fish out and place them in fresh, clean, pre-prepared water. This gets the fish out of potentially toxic bag water as quickly as possible. Any gradual adjustment to different parameters can happen afterward in clean water that won't poison them. For fish purchased from local stores where you can verify water parameters and transport time is short, traditional drip acclimation poses less risk. The key is understanding that acclimation is about more than just being slow and careful. It's about understanding water chemistry and making informed decisions based on the specific circumstances. Once fish are in the quarantine tank, the observation period begins. This is where many aquarists underestimate the commitment. How long should you quarantine? The answer depends on which pathogens you're concerned about, and each has its own life cycle and incubation period. Dr. Edward Noga, author of the veterinary textbook on fish diseases, notes that while there's little scientific consensus on the ideal duration, 3 to 4 weeks is generally considered adequate for most freshwater situations. Some koi enthusiasts quarantine new fish for a full year, exposing them to a complete cycle of temperature fluctuations to ensure nothing emerges. Most hobbyists find 4 to 8 weeks provides a reasonable balance between safety and practicality. What should you watch for during quarantine? Behavioral changes often appear before physical symptoms. Is the fish swimming normally or hanging at the surface gasping for air? Labored breathing with rapid gill movement can indicate parasites attacking the gills, even if you don't see any spots or other obvious signs. Is the fish hiding constantly or swimming actively? While some hiding is normal initially, excessive lethargy or complete refusal to emerge even for food suggests problems. Does the fish respond eagerly at feeding time or show no interest in food? Loss of appetite is one of the earliest warning signs of internal parasites or bacterial infections. Physical examination is equally important. Look at the fish's color. Has it darkened or paled compared to when you first added it? Many species change color in response to stress or disease. Check the fins. Are they clamped tightly against the body or spread naturally? Clamped fins indicate stress or illness. Examine the body for any spots, fuzzy growths, or unusual markings. White spots the size of salt grains mean ick. A golden or dusty appearance, especially visible with a flashlight in a darkened room, suggests velvet. Cotton-like growths indicate fungal infections or Columnaris bacteria. Look at the fish's body shape. Is the abdomen sunken or bloated? A pinched, hollow appearance can mean internal parasites or starvation. Are the eyes clear and normal or cloudy? Eye cloudiness combined with heavy breathing are symptoms of potentially fatal diseases. Watch how the fish interacts with its environment. Does it swim smoothly or flash and scratch against surfaces? Flashing behavior, where fish rub their bodies against rocks, decorations, or the tank bottom, is a classic sign that external parasites are irritating their skin. Does it produce normal waste or show signs of unusual feces? Long, stringy white or clear feces can indicate internal parasites, particularly hexamida and cichlids. The debate over prophylactic medication versus observational quarantine is ongoing. Some aquarists medicate every new fish for common parasites and bacterial infections, regardless of whether symptoms appear. The logic is straightforward. Many pathogens can be present without visible symptoms, and it's better to eliminate them proactively than risk an outbreak. This approach is particularly common with valuable fish like discus, or in systems where treatment would be difficult or impossible, such as reef tanks full of invertebrates that can't tolerate most fish medications. Others argue that medicating healthy fish unnecessarily causes stress, can select for drug-resistant pathogens, and may weaken the fish's own immune response. They quarantine to observe and only treat if specific symptoms appear. Both approaches can work, but success depends on consistency and attention to detail. If you choose observational quarantine, you need to actually observe, checking the fish multiple times daily for subtle changes. If you choose prophylactic medication, you need to use appropriate medications at proper therapeutic doses, not random combinations of over-the-counter remedies. For those who do medicate prophylactically, common protocols include treatment with copper compounds for external parasites like ike and velvet, combined with either metronidazole or formalin for other protozoans like Brooklinella and Uranema. This covers the most common and deadly fish diseases. Following the initial medication period, deworming medications like praziquantel and fenbendazole or levamisole are often administered in food to eliminate internal parasites. Each medication has specific dosing requirements, duration, and safety considerations for different species. It's crucial to understand that no quarantine protocol is 100% effective. Even the most rigorous procedures can miss certain pathogens. The goal isn't to achieve perfect sterility. That's impossible. The goal is to reduce pathogen loading to levels where the fish's immune system can maintain control. Consider Columnaris bacteria. They're present on virtually every fish and in nearly every tank. You'll never completely eliminate them, but you can reduce their numbers from potentially overwhelming levels down to amounts that healthy fish can easily resist. Water quality testing during quarantine cannot be optional. Ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, and pH should be monitored regularly. Daily for the first week with new fish, then every few days after that. Even with cycled filter media, adding fish increases the bioload, and bacterial populations need time to expand. Small ammonia or nitrite spikes can occur, and you need to catch them early with water changes before they harm already stressed fish. Many quarantine systems benefit from frequent partial water changes. Some aquarists change 25 to 50% every few days, both to maintain water quality and to remove medications between treatment rounds. Temperature stability is just as important as water chemistry. Fluctuating temperatures stress fish and can allow diseases to take hold. Most heaters are reliable, but failures happen. A thermometer, preferably 2, in case one malfunctions, lets you catch problems quickly. Some aquarists keep backup heaters specifically for emergency use. After the quarantine period ends and your fish appears healthy, you face another decision: how to safely introduce it to your display tank. Some aquarists gradually adjust water parameters over several days if there are significant differences between the quarantine and display systems. Others, confident their water chemistry is similar, make the transfer relatively quickly. The key is to avoid shocking the fish with sudden large changes in temperature, pH, or hardness after it's successfully made it through quarantine. An often overlooked benefit of quarantine works in both directions. We typically think of quarantine as protecting our established fish from new arrivals. But the reverse is also true. Your display tank contains its own population of microorganisms that your resident fish have developed resistance to over time. A new fish hasn't been exposed to these specific pathogens and might be vulnerable to infections your other fish easily resist. By gradually introducing small amounts of display tank water to the quarantine system over the latter part of the quarantine period, you give the new fish time to begin developing immunity to whatever microbes await in its new permanent home. Let's address common mistakes that undermine even well-intentioned quarantine efforts. The most obvious is not quarantining at all, the gamble that this fish will be fine because it looks healthy or came from a reputable source. As one veteran aquarist noted, most hobbyists skip quarantine for years with no problems, then lose half a tank to a single infected fish. It only takes one catastrophe to learn the lesson. But even those who quarantine can make crucial errors. Setting up an uncycled quarantine tank and expecting stressed fish to survive the resulting ammonia spike is worse than not quarantining at all. Adding fish to a quarantine tank too quickly after setup, without verifying the filtration is functioning, leads to secondary infections from poor water quality. Overcrowding the quarantine tank with too many fish at once overwhelms the biological filtration and increases stress through territorial conflicts. Another frequent mistake is inadequate hiding places. Bare bottom tanks are necessary, but fish in unfamiliar environments are already stressed. Without adequate cover, they'll remain in a constant state of alarm, which suppresses immune function and can actually trigger disease outbreaks. Those simple PVC pipe fittings make all the difference in giving fish places to retreat and feel secure. Improper use of medications causes significant problems. Some aquarists pour in multiple medications simultaneously, hoping something will work, without understanding what each medication targets or how they interact. Others underdose medications to save money or because they're worried about harming the fish, which creates resistant pathogen strains without eliminating the disease. Following manufacturer instructions and understanding what you're treating and why makes the difference between successful treatment and making things worse. Cross-contamination defeats the purpose of quarantine. Using the same net for your quarantine and display tanks, not washing hands between tanks, allowing water to splash from one system to another, these seemingly minor oversights can transmit diseases between systems. Maintaining strict protocols about separate equipment and careful hygiene is tedious but essential. Perhaps the most insidious mistake is insufficient observation time. Fish appear healthy after 2 weeks, so they're moved to the display tank. 3 weeks later, everyone notices white spots or behavioral changes. Different diseases have different incubation periods. It typically shows within a week or two, but internal parasites might not become visible for a month or more. Cutting the quarantine period short because fish look fine is gambling that nothing with a longer incubation period is present. Some diseases can lie dormant for extended periods, only appearing when fish experience stress in their new environment. This is why some experienced aquarists restart the quarantine clock completely if they need to treat disease. The observation period begins again after treatment is finished and symptoms disappear. If you treat for Aish in week 2 of quarantine, you should observe for another 4 to 8 weeks after treatment ends to ensure you've actually eliminated the parasite. The logistical challenges of maintaining a quarantine system shouldn't be minimized. Not everyone has space for an extra tank sitting mostly unused. Equipment costs money. Filters, heaters, medications, and test kits add up. The time commitment is significant. Daily observation, frequent water changes, water testing, and potential treatment protocols require dedication. For casual hobbyists with inexpensive community fish, the cost-benefit analysis might reasonably lead them to accept the risk rather than maintain full quarantine protocols. But for those with established tanks full of valuable fish, rare species, or sensitive organisms like reef corals that can't be treated if disease strikes, quarantine isn't really optional. It's insurance. You might pay the premium for years without needing it, but when disaster strikes, you'll be grateful you invested in protection. One outbreak of marine velvet that wipes out a reef tank can cost thousands of dollars in lost livestock. A Columnaris infection that decimates a discus breeding colony represents years of investment lost. The cost of proper quarantine equipment and procedures is minimal compared to the potential losses. There's also an ethical dimension that shouldn't be ignored. We've accepted responsibility for these animals' lives by bringing them into our homes. That responsibility includes giving them the best chance to survive and thrive. A fish that dies from a preventable disease because we couldn't be bothered with quarantine procedures has suffered unnecessarily. While we can't eliminate all risks, we can reduce them substantially with relatively simple precautions. The science of fish health and disease management continues to evolve. New medications and treatment protocols are developed regularly. Our understanding of fish immune systems, stress responses, and disease resistance improves. What was considered best practice 10 years ago might be outdated today. Staying current with research, particularly from aquaculture science, where commercial operations have strong economic incentives to minimize disease losses, helps home aquarists make better decisions. Academic research into fish diseases often provides insights that trickle down to the hobby. Studies on how different stressors affect fish immune function, optimal quarantine durations for specific pathogens, or efficacy of various treatment compounds inform the practical advice experienced aquarists share. While home aquarists can't conduct controlled laboratory experiments, we can learn from those who do and apply that knowledge to our own systems. Ultimately, successful quarantine comes down to understanding the biology of fish health, having appropriate equipment and protocols, and committing to consistent implementation. It's not complicated in principle. Separate new arrivals, monitor them, address problems before they spread. But the details matter: water quality, stress management, understanding disease signs, proper medication use, and adequate observation time all contribute to success or failure. Consider what happens in professional settings: public aquariums, commercial fish farms, zoos with aquatic exhibits. Every single one has rigorous quarantine protocols. New arrivals spend weeks or months in isolation, examined repeatedly, often treated prophylactically, and only released to display or breeding populations after veterinarians certify them disease-free. These institutions have too much invested in their collections to gamble on disease introductions. The protocols they've developed through decades of experience and professional veterinary guidance can inform home aquarists' practices adapted to hobby-scale systems. When you're standing in the fish store looking at that perfect specimen you've wanted for months, the temptation to take it straight home and add it to your tank is powerful. The fish looks healthy, the store seems reputable, and besides, you've been lucky so far. But every experienced aquarist who's lost a tank to disease can tell you exactly when they made that same calculation. It's always fine until suddenly it isn't. Setting up and maintaining a quarantine system requires investment: money, space, time, and attention. There will be moments when it feels like wasted effort, weeks where nothing goes wrong, fish that sail through quarantine without a single symptom. You might even question whether you really need all this. But the first time you spot white spots in quarantine instead of in your display tank, the first time you successfully treat a bacterial infection before it spreads to your prized fish, you'll understand exactly why this protocol exists. The journey a fish takes from breeding farm to your home aquarium is long and stressful. Transportation, handling, crowding, water changes, temperature shifts, each step takes its toll on their immune systems and physical condition. By the time they reach your tank, they've survived incredible challenges. Quarantine gives them time to recover from that journey in a safe, monitored environment. It allows their stressed immune systems to rebuild. It gives them time to heal from any minor injuries or infections sustained during transport. And it gives you time to ensure they're not carrying anything that could devastate your established aquarium. This isn't about paranoia or excessive caution. It's about understanding biology, respecting the challenges these animals face, and taking reasonable precautions to protect both new arrivals and established residents. Every professional who works with aquatic animals implements quarantine protocols. Every commercial aquaculture operation that wants to stay in business has rigorous disease management systems. The knowledge and procedures exist. The only question is whether home aquarists will use them. If you're interested in keeping healthy, thriving aquarium fish for years rather than months, quarantine is one of the most powerful tools available. It's not exciting. There are no dramatic transformations or stunning displays. It's watching fish swim in a bare tank for weeks. It's testing water and making notes about appetite and behavior. It's patience and attention to detail. But it works. And when your main display tank continues thriving year after year without disease outbreaks, when new additions integrate smoothly without bringing disaster, when you can look at your established fish and know they're safe, that's when you understand the value of doing things properly from the beginning. We've covered a lot of ground here: the biology of fish stress and immunity, disease transmission, nitrogen cycle fundamentals, equipment requirements, observation techniques, medication protocols, and common pitfalls. If this seems overwhelming, remember that most of these concepts build on each other. Once you understand why stress suppresses immunity, you understand why rushed acclimation causes problems. Once you understand the nitrogen cycle, you understand why cycled filter media is essential. Once you understand pathogen life cycles, you understand why observation periods need to be so long. Start simple if you're new to quarantine. A basic setup with a cycled sponge filter, a heater, some PVC hiding spots, and a commitment to 4 weeks of observation will catch most common problems. As you gain experience, you can refine your protocols, add medication strategies if needed, and adjust procedures based on what works for your specific situation. The key is starting, actually setting up that quarantine system and using it consistently, even when it's inconvenient. The fish that swim in our tanks depend entirely on our decisions. We control their environment, their diet, their health care, everything. That's a significant responsibility. Meeting that responsibility well means sometimes doing things that seem like extra work, investing in equipment that sits unused most of the time, and exercising patience when we'd rather rush ahead. But the reward is healthy fish that live their full potential lifespans, displaying natural behaviors and colors, free from preventable diseases. Think back to that scenario we started with, the beautiful new fish that brings disaster to your established tank. Now you understand the invisible chain of causes behind that outcome, the stress of transport weakening immune defenses, the pathogens carried from previous systems, the incubation period that hides symptoms until it's too late, the disease transmission that spreads infection before you even realize there's a problem. And you understand the solution. Proper quarantine breaks every link in that chain. So, if you found this information valuable and you're committed to keeping healthier aquarium fish, show your support by clicking that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more in-depth content on aquarium science and fish care. And thank you for taking the time to learn about proper quarantine procedures. Your fish will thank you for it, even if they can't say the words. The reduced stress, the better health outcomes, the longer lifespans. Those are their thanks. And your thriving, disease-free display tank is yours.